Without any further ado, I just want to thank our crew and get underway. The name of this series, of course, is Poland, Poles and Jews in 2018 trying to be friends, but prevented by different versions of a common history. And tonight's the third lecture, entitled Deuteronomy 28, 49, 54, the Poles and Jews under Czarist rule. So let's get right into it, because there's a fair amount to cover. As the title suggests, let's go to the first one. Yeah, the title suggests, if you look in Book of Dvarim, in the Tochacha, in the curses, it says that God will bring upon you a God mirachim miksei, it's a nation from far away, from the ends of the earth, like the eagle swooping down, whose language you don't understand. A fierce and heartless nation, no respect for the young and a pity for the old. Its armies will devour your livestock and crops, be destroyed. They'll leave you no grain, wine, oil, calves, and you'll starve to death. In other words, Russia. This is what happened to Poland and to the Jews. Not like Hitler, nothing like that at all. But compared to the Poland that was yesterday, that's how they experienced it. For 120 years, and I'm picking up where I left off last time, the Poles found themselves without a state, without a real state, subject to Prussia, Austria, and above all, Russia. So the country of Poland underwent a national vivisection. Okay? This was Poland, and in the different divisions, this was given to this was given. By the time it's all over, after the Congress of Vienna, we'll see in a minute, Austria gets this, Prussia gets this, and Russia gets everything else. So the country was literally divided up among its neighbors. And the same was for the Jews. Now, since each state was different, Prussia is different than Austria, which is different than Russia, we have three narratives. Three Polish narratives, how the Poles experienced the 120 years under Russia, and how they did under Prussia, under the Germans, and under the Austrians. And the Jews also, how the Jews experienced the 120 years under the Russians, the next 120 years under the Austrians, the next 120 years under the Prussians. Because for both sides, as I've tried to point out here, the good old kingdom of Poland of yesteryear with all its mishigas and all its freedom was gone. Okay? The chaos and the relative freedom. So I'm going to start right now with Prussia very quickly, because that's the smallest. The Prussians, now Prussia is a country where Berlin is. Berlin's the capital of Prussia. Later on, Prussia took over and became the leading state of Germany. Tom was a separate country. If you look in the original partitions of Poland I talked about last time, 1772, 1793, and 1795. In other words, in the 1700s when they did the original business, Prussia took a big chalik. Here, I mean, I want to point out, Warsaw became a provincial city of Prussia. So they took the whole central Poland. Okay, so that's crazy. And what it means is, here there are two pictures of the same thing. This is all central Poland that now has belonged to the Kingdom of Prussia, whose headquarters in Berlin. Like, that doesn't even make any sense, right? And the Prussians could only have a policy of trying to make all these Poles, millions of them, become Prussians, become Germans. How does that work? You swallow too big of a hornet's nest, you see? Now, the story gets more complicated or interesting because look what you have over here. This is Prussian Poland for 12 years, from 1795 to 1807. Last month or so, we talked about the French Revolution, Napoleon. One of the things Napoleon did in 1807, let's go to the next slide, 1806, was he destroyed Prussia. This is the Battle of Jena and Auerstadt, where the Prussian army was shattered. And so one of the things Napoleon did after he busted Prussia was, he said, you're not keeping all that territory, right? Not because he loved Poland, because Napoleon wasn't built that way, but, you'll see in a minute, but because he wanted Prussia not to be so powerful. So what did he do? Let's go to the next line. He cut away the old part that they had. No, he took all this away from Prussia, and a little bit later from Austria, and he made this into like a separate shtickle, small Polish state, because he wanted Prussia over here to be weak, or narrower, skinnier. In famous legend, which is half legend, half true, he did it because he fell in love with a Polish girlfriend. This is Countess Walewska. Oh my goodness, how many movies in Hollywood have been made since Charles Boyer, you know? I'm serious, of Countess Walewska, where she threw herself at Napoleon's feet, I'll be euphemistic, and what do you call it? And he had a child by her, you know, and she said, do this for Poland and all the rest of it. I'm serious. But really, like I said before, he wasn't built that way. Napoleon was a hard, real politic kind of person. It wasn't a plus of his, it was a minus. But that's who he was. Nevertheless, what Napoleon did was he created, from the Prussian territory and later a little bit more, a mini Poland, what he called the Grand Duke of Warsaw, Grand Duchy of Warsaw. And the idea was, this will be what's left of Poland. All the other stuff, Russia will keep, Austria will keep, but this, at least there'll be, how should I put it, a partial Tchias HaMesim. It won't be that there's zero Poland out there. Because the truth of the matter is, it was an outrage. You see what I'm saying? People didn't feel bad if small nationalities are snuffed out. People did not feel bad if disgusting nationalities like the Jews are snuffed out. But people in Europe felt bad if honorable and historic nationalities like Poland, is snuffed out. I mean, after all, it was a rape, like we did last time. They just did it. And so they wanted this, it was a feeling in general as part of the PC, and some kind of Poland should come back. Doesn't necessarily have to be what it was, but something epis. And so that's what he did. It's what we call in Hebrew a Pekida Ba'alma, right? It's not a Geula, it's like a little bit of Pekida Ba'alma. Now the Poles, of course, hope that one day he'll add to it and make a real Poland, but it never happened. Skipping over all the inessential stuff, eventually Napoleon was defeated, and the countries of Europe got together at the Congress of Vienna in 1814, 1815. Let's go to the next one. This means that you have here what happens every 100 years or so in history, roughly, in which all the states get together to redraw up the maps of Europe, and that becomes international law because all the states agree to this. Does anybody know when the last time we had such a conference, international conference to redraw and set a map of Europe? When? You all forgot? Helsinki in the 1970s. I promise you. That's what it was about. Russia wanted, they should say, this is Poland, and this is Lithuania, and it's all part of Russia, and this, and now everybody agrees it's all international law. Right? I hope to talk about that this winter, in 1976, but nevertheless, that's exactly what it was about. You want to nail down your gains, as it were. You see? And so in the Congress of Vienna, which is a very interesting process, all these rulers and cynical statesmen got together to redraw up the map of Europe, hopefully in such a way that will make sense. What's shot in such a way to make sense? The necessary needs of each country, to the degree possible, will be satisfied. Because a wise lawyer will say, this deal's not going to hold unless what? Both sides feel that they can walk away with it. If you have a winner take all, then you have endless resentment. The other one's going to want to go back. So this is what's called statesmanship. How you make the other one feel sufficiently satisfied. Nobody feels great, but everybody feels okay. And so for the first time, the Polish question has to be discussed and reviewed by all the nations of Europe, including England and France, because they're part of the powers. That's the Castlereagh and the Duke of Wellington. There were big English and French statesmen there. To be clear, some countries carved up Poland. The others didn't want it. Specifically, the three blind mice. Russia, Austria, Prussia. England and France didn't want that to happen. And now you're getting together to redraw the map of Europe in a way that everybody will agree. So you can't simply say, well, we did it, and that's it, and all the rest of it, because then you leave a festering sore. And believe you me, the Russians and the Prussians and the Austrians wanted that their gains should be recognized in international law. So the question is, what price did they pay for that? And that's what it all boils down to. Because they condemned the partition in the 18th century. By this time, it wasn't politically correct for Prussia, Austria, and Russia to simply say, we committed rape because we could, we got away with it, and too darn big. Since the Congress of Vienna proclaimed itself a Christian and legitimist assembly, bent on righting the sacrilegious wrongs that had been perpetrated by the atheistic French Revolution, right? And by Napoleon, nobody could justify, as I told you a minute ago, that the Poles, a long-time and well-known people of Europe, simply disappeared off the map, okay? On what basis, for example, could Russia justify ruling the Poles against their will and getting angry at them if the Poles revolted? Which they did every once in a while. Naturally they did, because you took them over, you had no right to do it. Even a dictatorship needs a narrative. It's funny, read Stalin. Hitler didn't care so much. Stalin always bent over there with a major liar and always was justified. Get it? Why are we taking over this country? the workers want us here. You see? The minorities are asking the Soviet Union to liberate them. We're taking over Eastern Poland to liberate the Ukrainians. I mean, personally, you're always looking for a narrative that makes it justify, instead of what it really is, which is, okay? Hitler was a behemoth, so he simply said, yes, we take it because we need it. You understand? I mean, but I will tell you something. Look how dumb he was. He alienated zillions of people, and Stalin won over zillions of people, I'm sorry to say, right? Including some of your relatives, okay? Because he used these kind of narratives. So how did he justify wiping out Poland? On the other hand, the three empires were determined to hold on to what they had, okay? So he's not going to let go of Galicia, of the Austrian part. He's not going to let go of the Russian part. He's not going to let go of the Prussian part. So how are you going to work all this out? This was one of the challenges, one of the big challenges in the Congress of Vienna. It's not the whole map, but Europe was an important chalik of it. Here's where it gets complicated. Wise statesmen realized that there actually were security needs for the three empires wanting to hold on to these lands. Let me put it this way. There's Metternich, there's Castlereagh, there's the Duke of Wellington. These are famous European statesmen of yesteryear. Russia needs a buffer territory, so they need the Ukraine and all that because somebody will invade them. How come Napoleon was beat? Because he had to start all the way back. See? How come Hitler was beat? Because he had to start so far back. It kind of makes sense. If you're Germany, same thing, you need buffer area. If you see what I'm saying? Notice, there really is a national security needs. They have to recognize there. This is a problem you have in the international situation today. Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, for example, are now three independent states that kick the Russians out. But they're right next door to Russia. And they join NATO. How's Russia ever going to make up with that? You see what I'm saying? It's too much against their national security interest for them to do this. So why did America want to do that? Like, what do we get that we have U.S. Air Force personnel in Estonia, 20 miles away from Leningrad? Is that wise statesmanship? You know who makes this argument? Pat Buchanan. Nobody wants to hear it. You know what I'm saying? It's an old business which says you can't go and push too hard. So Putin, somewhere on his agenda, not low, has got to be to get the Americans out of Estonia and somehow reassert Russian, thing over there. If they don't rule them like they did once upon a time, they want to at least make it that nobody else should be a threat to them. I'm just trying to point out to you, states have certain fundamental security problems, and they have to be addressed. Believe you me, this lies at the very heart, does it not, of the Arab-Israeli conflict. You see? They say, give us that back everything. Israel said, what about our security? So it depends on the president, And then the Arabs say, I guess, what about the Palestinian security? So it's tricky. So as I said before, these statesmen were wise and cold, meaning calculating. As I said before, let's go to the next one. Russia doesn't want to start the invasion here. Russia says, let's hold Russia here so they'll start too far back and they won't be able to get to Moscow. Kind of makes sense. Go to the next one. Isn't that why Hitler and Napoleon were not able to conquer Russia? Because they started too far back. So by the time they get to Moscow, it was a winter. If they'd be up close, starting from the edge of Ukraine, it's not that far away. So you hear where Russia's coming from. Look at Prussia. It's the armpit, as they call it. Here's Prussia, like that. Poland sticks into it, like that. They can't afford, from the national security point of view, to have a potentially hostile power coming right, as I'm pointing over here, right between East Prussia and Silesia, and go right into Berlin, which is over there. Can't have that. So how do you expect to have a secure European peace if you don't acknowledge these fundamental, what shall I say, survival realities? A wise statesman seeking long-term peace takes into account the genuine needs of states. And that's, as I said, why Castlereagh, Kissinger wrote his PhD dissertation on Castlereagh. Get it? Because he wanted to know, how did they make a peace that lasted 100 years? It was cynical, it was this, but it worked. So it's just interesting. On the other hand, it wasn't right to simply eliminate a live nation with millions of people. I'm talking about the Poles. So a certain fig leaf was created to justify the realpolitik. Poland, quote unquote, was to continue to exist, but as an independent part of Russia. an independent part of Prussia. Not really, but officially, okay? The King of Prussia would not take over Poland. He would rule part of Poland as the Grand Duke of Posen. The Tsar of Russia would rule something called the Kingdom of Poland, which was created by the Congress of Vienna, which is the small central part of Poland, around Warsaw and Lublin, which is like Poland after the second partition. And this is what the map looks like for 100 years, from 1815 to 1915, right? Here's Russia, here's Prussia. This part belongs to Prussia. It's called the Grand Duchy of Posen. It's Polish, but now it's under Prussia. And this part is called Congress Poland. You'll see that sometimes in your writings. It means the shtickle of Poland that was created as a semi-independent entity under the control of the Tsar of Russia by the Congress of Vienna. So it's called Congress Poland. I hope I haven't confused you, but if I have, that's good too. Now, this you could justify to public opinion. We didn't destroy Poland. I mean, all this stuff, knew Russia took it. It was Ukrainians anyway, Lithuanians. There's still Poland, sort of, but it's not a Poland that could ever threaten Russia, like I told you before. That's what Putin would like. He would like an Estonia, a Lithuania, and all that, which is part of Russia, but wasn't. No, you can rule yourselves, but we have the army there and that sort of business. Now, theoretically, and only theoretically, it could work. Agreed? I mean, Roosevelt wanted this at the end of World War II. He said to Stalin, listen, let Poland be free, but we won't have any army there. The Russian army can be, there. You know what I mean? So nobody can attack you, but don't force all the Poles to become communists. They don't want to do that. Of course, Stalin said no. This would happen anyway, way back then. Now, the problem is that these countries were too cynical and they didn't want this to really happen. So let's move to the next one. The King of Prussia has no intention of allowing a whole bunch of Polacks to be part of his kingdom, and therefore it's going to be, how shall I put it? I mean, he's a German. So basically, the only civilized people are Germans. So therefore, the only thing to do with all these people is turn them into Germans. So the only thing to do is tear up all their Polish books, close down all their Polish schools, to the degree possible, get rid of their Polish churches, turn them into Germans. And that's what he's going to try to do. That was cheating, but guess what? It wasn't no United Nations, it wasn't no CNN. So that's what the Prussians ended up doing for the next 100 years. To the degree that they could, they tried to Germanize this part of Poland, what they call the province of Posen. You'd be surprised. Many of you, I'm sure, I don't know individually, have parents that come from that area. And same thing with the Tsar of Russia. Well, he was a little bit different. He was a weirdo, and so he had mood swings. Probably induced by the guilt that he murdered his father, but you can't tell for sure. This is Russia, Well, listen, his grandmother, Catherine the Great, killed her husband. This is how it goes over there. So they call it Tuesday. So anyhow, wait a minute. Hold on. His best friend, or one of his best friends, was Prince Czarist, a Polish nobleman. And so he kind of was willing to make it happen if it would work and wouldn't hurt against Russia. So he was like this and that. The Prussians were definitely one like that. He is not ready. He doesn't want to try to do what I just told you. Go into Poland, take 10 million people, close down the Polish schools, tear up the Polish books, burn all the Polish stuff, and try to make everybody speak Russian and all that. And he says, as long as they keep their nose clean, it's okay with me. There was in central Poland under him for 10 years a Polish army, under his overall command, a Polish government, a Polish administration, Polish schools, university. You can have your own little thing as long as you don't get too uppity. Austria didn't even bother. They're so reactionary. They said, we're here, we're controlling. Now, so that means that for the next century, that was what you and I called the 1800s, Poland was under three empires. There was no Poland. Each treated the Poles hostilely, but differently. Prussia simply cheated and tried to Germanize everybody in Posen, using various carrot and stick tricks. 2/3 of Posen province was Polish, the rest Germans and Jews. So if you went to 1914, 100 years later, it's still 60% of the population and more are really Polish. And this was a big problem in German politics. Because otherwise, besides that, the whole Germany is German. So why don't they let go of it? No, you can't let go of this. It's our border province, and all this kind of stuff. The anti-Polish laws naturally aroused Polish antipathy, and over the next century, surprise, surprise, the Poles stubbornly refused to Germanize. So all during the reign of this guy, and then this guy, and this guy, you always have what you call in German politics the Polish problem, which means the Poles in the province of Posen. It's not really a Polish province. You had no business taking him over, but that's what happened. Now, what about the Jews? That's where we're kind of interested over here. Very interesting. If you're a Jew living in that part of Germany, and there were a lot. You live in Posen, you live in Leszno, you live in Torn, these places in Eastern Germany. They're not really German Jews, are they? Get it? Not really German, but they're in the process of Germanizing. These are Polish Jews. But over the course of the 1800s, the Jews Germanized, because that way they get treated better by the authorities. See, if you're Polish, this is your culture. And so you're willing to make sacrifices on behalf of that. If you're Jewish, first of all, you probably spoke Yiddish anyway. Okay? Second of all, you're not a Polish patriot necessarily that you give up all your stuff. If it's now under Germany, so you give them a job. Why were they Polish before? Because the Poles are ruling. What about now? The Germans are ruling. And so the Polish Jews in the province of Posen, 50, I don't know how many thousands, Germanized, okay? And so they became Yekas, but the Eastern European Yekas, they're a little different than the other German Jews. In the beginning, at the very beginning when this process, they didn't know what's going to happen, like you and I have 20/20 hindsight, and they didn't know should they be Polish or German. So in the province of Posen, in the city of Posen, which was a fairly large Jewish community, when the question came at the very beginning, 1813, 1814, just when all this changes were happening, so the big, half the community said we should get a German-speaking rabbi, the modern and the Prussian will like that. They'll say, oh no, the Poles will come back tomorrow and they'll take vengeance. And anyway, we want an old-fashioned Polish-speaking rabbi who speaks Alakaini and all the rest of it, like we're used to. And the compromise candidate was Rabbi Akiva Eiger, because he was German, but very old-fashioned, therefore he's like Polish. And I'm serious. There were huge fights in the community over all this, and he had by no means had an easy time in Posen, but that's for another occasion. But over the course of time, 1820s, 1830s, 1840s, 50s, the Jews Prussianized. They did, though they were more Jewish than other Prussian Jews. Okay, to give you an example, of what I'm talking about, the original Czarist Israel in Baltimore, Maryland, the Glen Abbey Shul was composed of two minions that came together to form a common congregation. One was a South German minion from Bavaria, the Strauss brothers, and another one was a Posen minion. And one used the South German sitter, Rettelheim, and the other were German Jews, but they were Posen. I'm not sure. I think Jeffrey Cohn's, the other Jeff Cohn's family from there. I could be wrong. And therefore they used a Polish sitter. You understand? And if you went to U.S. newspapers long ago, they said it's a Polish minion. It's a German Jews, but they're from Posen. You get it? So it was complicated in that way. And a lot of your 19th century German Jewish intellectuals are really not German, they're Posen. They're Polish. Here's Jastrow, is the famous Orthodox historian named Berliner. There's Gratz. There's Friedlander, who headed the Jewish College in London. This is the super ultra reform rabbi, Holdheim. Not really German, but they're German. Meaning, now they speak German, they went to German schools, even German universities. So they reinvented themselves, and that's what happened. Overall, they Germanized, with most becoming not from, because that's what happens with German Jews. Not all. As I said before, Rabbi Akiva Eiger, who was the rabbi there for 20-some years, had a terrible time trying to deal with all these Balabatim who are in the process of Germanizing and becoming less from, and they're always trying to clip his wings, and he's always having fights with them and all the rest of it. And he's old school, obviously. And there was a cultural chaos, because where are we going with this? Are we Polish? Are we loyal to our ancestral traditions as old-fashioned Ashkenazi Jews? Are we Torim Derech Eretz? Are we in the middle? What's going on? Why did Yiddishkeit take such a hit in this part of Poland? The answer, most people, and I would agree, is that there's one unique aspect of this part of Poland which makes it very different than the other parts of Poland in the 1800s. No Hasidism. Why? Because Hasidism was spreading into Poland in the early 1800s, but when Prussia came in, They want on no Hasidim, whatever, the Prussia, the police state, and that's it. And wherever you don't have Hasidism in the 19th century, the Yiddishkeit is weak because the countervailing forces are very powerful. And you don't have the kind of crazy passion that they bring to it, which is the countervailing force, right? You don't have to be Hasidic to be from in Poland in the 19th century. You just need them around you. You get it? So you don't have an imposing whatsoever. It's very interesting in this regard. But we don't have time to go to this any farther. Now I want to move to the other part of Poland, Galicia. If you're a Galicianer, do not raise your hand. He says now, which fell to Austria long before. Galicia had been in Austria since 1772, the first partition of Poland. That's a fairly sized, large province. Basically, Galicia is very interesting because they had a gigantic Jewish population. Look at the numbers. Look at those numbers. 200,000, eventually almost 1 million, of course, a century, a baby boom, agreed? In that province, mostly in the east. So the Galicians is a big factor, numerically. Second of all, let's go to the next one. Galicia is really two zones. This part, the left side, is Polish. Only Poles live there. This side, the bigger half on the right, as you see today, today's map, is not in Poland. Why? It's not Polish. The great majority of the population there was Ukrainian. In the 19th century, they used to call it Ruthenian, but it's Ukrainians. There are some Polish landlords, noblemen, like back from the 1500s, that still rule the area. So you have, like in Khmelnytsky's time, the Polish noblemen and the peasants who were slaves are Ukrainians, and you got the Jews. And that was the Mishigas of the old Poland, which kind of worked once upon a time. But I want to remind you, the Jews, it worked for the Jews because they served the Polish noblemen in collecting the money and so forth and selling the booze to the Ukrainian peasants. It's not a good situation. You hear where I'm going with this, okay? So it depends which part of Galicia you're from. And I'm serious. If you tell me my parents come from this part, I know who you are. If you tell me my parents come from this part, I also know who you are, but it's a different story. Okay, it's a different story. Now, the story of what happens in this province, which is large, I'll tell you again, hundreds of thousands of Jews, okay, is the story of whoever's ruling Austria, the Austrian Empire. Well, it's three guys, basically. It's Joseph II, and it's Franz I, and Franz Joseph. He was from 1790 to 1835, but they carried his policies forward, rigor mortis, till 1848. That's a long time. It's well over 50 years. And he was in office 68 years. So these rulers are there for a long time. So not only are there three separate rulers, but they represent three separate sets of policies. Okay? Now, under Joseph II, the first guy, he's what you call benevolent despot, meaning I know what's better for you even if it kills you. And that's really what it was. And second of all, his idea is to make everybody in the Austro-Hungarian Empire, which is 60 nationalities, all German, including the Gypsies, good luck. And they should all dress middle class and act the same, and hopefully it should be Catholic. Okay, hopefully. Now, you have the bureaucratic absolutist state. As a conservative Republican will tell you, when the government gets in there, the government is the problem. And that was certainly the case in the Austrian administration of Galicia. They really screwed things up. The bureaucratic absolutist state. His policy is unbelievably selfish. No Poles, no Jews, no Ukrainians, just Germanized subjects of the House of Habsburg. The past be damned. Look at the breathtaking arrogance of what we're talking about over here. I don't care about your ancestral traditions, your ways of eating, your clothing, your religious beliefs, all the other things. If you're Jewish, your thousands of years of heritage, none of that matters. How do we make you useful to the state today? And everything else down the drain. It's unbelievable. And by the way, is it going to work? For the Poles, it's all about erasing Polish language and culture. German schools are set up everywhere by the imperial administration. A German university is set up in Lemberg. Lemberg is the capital city of the eastern half. Okay? And the town is really Germanized. I'll tell you again, last summer I happened to be in Lemberg for a day. I've never been there before. I was at Lvov, they call it now. Lviv, excuse me. The Poles call it Lvov. They'll shoot you if you say that. Lviv. That's what the Ukrainians call it. Now it's located in Ukraine. It looks like Vienna. And they say, yeah, that's right. They on purpose, made the architecture look like Vienna. They want to make a German headquarters. You understand? Because they want to bring the hot. Look at this. If you're German, there's no question. The German culture is civilized. The Polish culture, backwards. Barefoot peasants. It's actually not true. I showed you a little bit over here. Poles had universities and stuff like that way back when. It's not true. They have a culture. They have their literature. They have all the rest of it. It's not mine, but they have theirs. And the Germans didn't really have, but that's how it was. And you were under their control. Polish resistance was crushed by, if I can use it, the Austrian KGB for their own good, of course. But, that's it. We're helping you out. Now, what about the Jews? Terrible. First of all, they screwed up the economy. The Austrians didn't know what they're doing. They're setting up the economic barriers to help themselves. You don't need a great brain to understand. Once upon a time, there was this huge area of Poland, which was one economic zone. No customs, no tolls. So if you lived in Galicia, you traded with at least your own country, which is the whole Ukraine, the whole Belarus, the whole Lithuania, Latvia. Good for business. Do you follow what I'm saying? It's like if you live in the USA today. At least if you live in the country, you can make a business just selling in the 50 states. There are a lot of businesses that do not need to sell overseas. There are a lot of businesses that do need to do overseas. I get that. But there are a lot that don't. And believe me, if you set up a franchise and you have it in all the 50 states, you're doing pretty good. Okay? So once upon a time, the Jews in Galicia were prosperous for a couple hundred years. They're prosperous because there are a lot of trade opportunities, and under that screwball system with the nobles and the toll, all the kind of mishigas I talked about, it kind of worked. And every Jew was hawking, and everybody was buying and selling all the time, but there's goods going everywhere, and it kind of works. It's an argument for, what's his name, Frederick von Hayek, the raw market capitalist economy. However, right, imagine, right, if this was your market, before you go exporting, right, if this is your market, and now it's not, because the Austrians shaved this piece off, and they say we're putting custom tolls and tariffs, and we think the Jews are too much involved in the trade, they control the commerce too much, and naturally the Jews keep on the old patterns of trading, so then you're violating the laws, you're smuggling. Smuggling, yesterday you set up this new, border post and all that. We've been selling down this road back and forth for centuries. You see what I'm saying? And the result is the introduction of terrible poverty, which becomes the characteristic of Galicia in general, and for the Jews in particular, down to the Second World War. I'll repeat, down to the Second World War. So here you have a case where the government brought in the poverty. And it was terrible because, starvation and prostitution, all kind of terrible things that result from not having enough food. And one of the things the Jews will do, obviously, is leave. And one of the places they will go in the 1800s in reaction or response to this induced poverty because of the backwards, topsy-turvy economic policies set by these doofuses, they'll go to a place called Hungary. And most of your Hungarian Jews are Galicianers who moved there in the 1800s to run away from the terrible economy in Galicia. You understand? Because Hungary, which is all part of the empire but it's a separate province, didn't have those conditions. And so if you move to Hungary, you can make a store. You can set up a little business. If you're lucky, you can do better. It's somewhat like the old Poland was once upon a time, because nobody ever divided Hungary up into 10 zones like they did to Poland. You see? So the majority of Hungarian Jews are really Galicians who moved there, running away from the bad conditions in Galicia set up by the Austrians. Before that, by the way, it was the opposite. Before that, Poland, including Galicia, was the prosperous zone. There's a famous speech of the Noda Yehuda, who was a Galicianer. He's born in Apta, and he was a rabbi and he learned in Brody, and he was a rabbi in Yampol. These are all places in Galicia. And eventually became the chief rabbi of Prague, which is all the way farther to the west. And he comes to Prague in 1755, and he says, I can't believe the poverty I see over here, The Jews and the others, I'm not used to this. I come from Galicia, where first of all, everybody's prosperous, and second of all, everybody's very tzedakah-oriented, which is why you have, he says, spiritually, why you have the prosperity over there. I'm not used, the West is terrible, the East is where it's at. But in the 1800s, it's the opposite, isn't that right? It's the opposite. So I'm just telling you, you have to know these sorts of things to understand what's going on in Eastern Europe. The economy, in other words, was colonialist. It's to help Austria. So, that means if you're part of this ever-growing Jew, remember the Jews went from 200,000 to almost 1 million. That sounds good, except that there's no food. You see what I'm saying, right? In other words, so you have 5 children, you have 10 children, but you have no parnosa. You see? Now, Joseph II, as I told you before, thought the Jews were too dominant. But at the same time, he thinks they're economic negatives. So he drives them out of many fields, economically ruining thousands of families. No Jews can have inns, no Jews can have bars. On the other hand, I do want them to go in this area and one in that area. Had everything highly regulated. Religiously, he wants to radically westernize by force Galician Jewry, because of too many rabbis, too much Talmud, and they look Hasidic and all that kind of business. And so he brings it, what I'm showing you now is what I mentioned last summer, the ugly face of the Haskalah. Because he brings in a famous friend of Moses Mendelssohn, was a bad guy, Hertz Hamburg. And he says, I want you to convert all the Jews to Haskalah, okay? Away from all this crazy Talmudism and all the rest of it. And so he has police power. And he sets up a whole network of schools, and you force your children to go there, and you can't get married unless you memorize his book on religion. And he's trying to end the Talmudic studies, and all the sorts of things that are in there. Naturally, it's provoked passive resistance and other from the Jewish communities. He sets up in Lemberg a teachers' academy so they can teach there, because otherwise you have all these teachers have to be brought in from Bohemia and the West. And it was a terrible situation because the Jews didn't want it. But that doesn't mean it matter, okay? As I said before, let's go to the next one. In 1787, this Hamburg guy became supervisor of the German Jewish school system in Galicia, assistant censor of Jewish books. That's one of the things he's into. He says in order to stop the bad influence on the Jews, get rid of the Jewish books like the Talmud and the Hasidic literature and all the rest of it, and don't allow any new ones, and let's destroy as many of the old ones as we can. I mean, this is how they want to reform, okay? Despite suspicion and opposition from the Jews, he embarked on a program of educational reform based on the model of the normal school, Normalschule, which is a teacher's school in Germany. Within 4 years, he founded 100 schools, including one for girls in Lemberg. In a patronizing letter, he tried to convince the Galician rabbis to cooperate with him. They want to teach a diktuk, the study of German instead of Yiddish, because everybody knows Yiddish is a corrupt form of German. It's a Jewish language. Do it right. The introduction of grades according to ancient Polish students, moral improvement. We all know the haters don't teach any morality, so he wants to teach it. Preparation for trade and craft, attention to the education of the poor. Throughout the years in which a German Jewish school existed, the opposition of the Rabbanim, the communities, and the population only intensified. Because this is the old thing, when you try to shove it down somebody's throat, you know what's going to happen. German Jewish teachers were regarded as outsiders and heretics who led the children astray, which they did actually, okay? The teachers like Hamburg himself had to rely on the Austrian police to enforce demands of the school system by fines or other compulsory measures. So you see where it's going? By establishing a pedagogical seminary in Lemberg, he tried to create a reservoir of local teachers who would replace what we would call the Melamids and the Chaters, and for indefinite period could serve assistants during their training. In 1793, he was ordered back to advise the central government legal matters concerning reorganization of life in Bohemia. Meaning, they said, you're too hated, it's not working too well. And let's go and try to deal with Bohemia, where there's no Hasidism, where the Yiddishkeit is weaker, the Czech Republic, right? That's the Czech Republic. The Yiddishkeit was weaker, and he wrote a memorandum on the moral and political improvement of the Israelites, basis for the pattern. He attacked the rabbis who were incorrigible, spoke of abolition of yeshivas, burning of rabbinic books. During his stay in Vienna, he requested to be chief censor and supervisor of all schools of the Habsburg Empire without success. So as I said before, this is the Haskalah gone wild, okay, on steroids in the evil sense. Now, and that's if you're a God's honor, that's what happens. It ain't the old kingdom of Poland anymore, with what we could call benign neglect, because he sees it as malign neglect, not something that's bad. Just two different appreciations of the reality. What is the main response to these efforts to reform Judaism? The intense, quick spread of Hasidism. That's what happens. Okay? That's exactly what happens, 1780s, 1790s. Because if you see this, you push me, I push back. The best way you can push back in those days, come a Chassid, because then you're ultra, you see? Galicia becomes overwhelmingly Hasidic. This is how it happened. And Hasidism becomes virulently anti-Maskilic. You can understand it. So you have two forces. So if you're Galicia, it's a battleground of ideologies, Hasidism on the one hand, and the Haskalah on the other. Okay? That's very characteristic of Galicia. The next era, because Joseph II died after 10 years, lasts a long time under Franz I, 1792 to 1835, and like I say, give it another 15 years, because his son was an imbecile. He was a mentally ill, and so the state ran on his advisors. They kept up the old policies. So the Kaiser was anti-Semitic, but he was a reactionary, because now the French Revolution scared everybody. So ironically, he doesn't want to suppress the Hasidim too much. Does that make sense? If you're a political reactionary, why do you not want to bother the Hasidim too much? They're not a political threat. If you have the Haskalah, they might start reading books about the French Revolution. People might start thinking of their own. If you're Hasidic, you go to a Tej. If you read a Sefer, it's about the next world. That's not a threat to the state. You understand? It's not a threat to the state. He has his hands full, by the way, with the Poles. Okay? See, he was not a nice guy, but from purely Machiavellian purposes, he's not so quick to suppress the Orthodox. And the Hasidim realized this, and they learned how to work this system. Boy, did they learn how to work this system. But one of the aspects of Hasidus, down till today, let me put it to you this way. Did they get Trump to give the guy pardon the other day? Yes or no? Rubashkin? They know how to work it? Somebody got to Trump? They know how to work the system? I'm serious. That's been a characteristic of Hasidus since day one. Because they grew up in a hard school, and Darwin, survival of the fittest, and if you want to maintain your identity in a hostile Austria, in a hostile Russia, you better learn to operate successfully within the boundaries of the system. So you always appeal to their higher interest. You understand? Okay. Now, anyhow, three groups of Jews appear in the 1800s, therefore in Galicia, which makes it a very interesting place for historians to study. You have the Hasidic masses, because that's what happens. The Rov Hamon Am, especially in the small shtetls and all that, all go Hasidic. You have the Maskilim, who are a very tiny group and live mainly in the cities. And they want to do what? They want to reform Judaism, if I can use that term. Not the way the German Jews did it with their reform Judaism, but in their own way. They want to change the emphasis on Judaism, and they want a Hebrew culture, and they don't like the way the Orthodox and the Hasidic are. And you have a third group who just want to assimilate. They're Germanizers. And they buddy up to the local Austrian officials. So you see this over and over again in the 19th century. In Galicia, you have a small town. You have three families aren't from. They and their daughter have a German education. She plays the piano. It's a Verstunken, little village. You're the 10 Austrian officials that are there to administer the place. Who you talk to? The Poles don't speak German, and they're barefoot. You know what I mean? Who you talk to? You end up going to the Jews' house all the time. Not good for the girls. Not good for that's what happens. But on the other hand, they get extra attention, and they get privileges, and things of this nature. This is how life was lived if you live under a corrupt system. There are three characteristic landmarks of the 19th century in Poland, in Galicia. One, I told you once before about the Rizhiner Rebbe. You remember this? He lived in Central Russia, in the Russian Empire, and he had a Moser bumped off, and they couldn't pin it on him exactly. This is the time of Nicholas, a Jew who was informing Masira to the Russians on something or other. Let's put it this way. one day 2 people went fishing in a river in the winter, and they found the guy at the bottom with chains at the bottom of the thing. It was a Jewish guy that nobody had liked. So you put 2 and 2 together. This happened all the time. It's an old Jewish thing that goes way back when in Talmud, and it's one of the rare cases of extrajudicial punishment. We just finished Parshas Pinchas, did we not? And Parshas Pinchas is talking about a guy who took the law into his own hands. And I won't say that Jews over the century took the law in their own hands, but there's always exception for the Moser. And I think I told you this in the past. There's a famous document that in Lucena, in Spain, in the Golden Age of Spain, in the 1000s, in the Muslim times, Andalusia, they stoned a Moser to death in the shul on Yom Kippur before Kol Nidre. Okay? So, meaning you don't commit treason against your own. And you don't inform on the others because that's like, you give everything away. So, anyway, for some reason or other, the Tsar of Russia got fixated on this and he decided to really investigate this. And everybody lied and all the rest of it. And by the time it's over, I did this once, I guess I'm happy to see people that remember. I can recycle it, I think I did it for my mom maybe at the time. But anyhow, the leading Hasidic Rebbe in Russia, the Rizhiner Rebbe, Shmuel Rizhiner, he was the leading Hasidic. He lived in a palace, all the rest of it. And he was the one, but they couldn't exactly get the goods on him. I'll tell you again, the Russian government put a lot of legal resources into all this. And when the trail was getting hot, so he was smuggled over the border into Austria, into Galicia. And they found him a new identity, and they just bribed everybody right and left. And by the time it's over, he was a native of Galicia. By the time it's over, he was born in Galicia, and they had the judge swear to it and all the rest of it. And because he was now a citizen of Galicia and he had so and so much money, because the Chassidim gave money, he was able to buy an estate and become a nobleman. And once you're a nobleman, you can't be extradited. You understand? So the point is, in order to make all this happen, the Chassidim had to learn how to work the system internationally. So how do you prevent the Russians from extraditing somebody over the border? You got to get to Metternich. How do you get to Metternich? That's a good one. How do you do it? Got to get to Rothschild. How do you get to Rothschild? Rabbi Meisels from Krakow and Warsaw is a friend of Rothschild. Rabbi Meisels is a misnagid. You get to somebody who knows Meisel. It worked. It really happened. So I'll tell you again, you cannot survive in a hostile environment unless you learn the tricks of the trade. That's all. In Eastern Europe, nice guys finish last. That's how it goes. I mean, not to put too fine a point on it, what kind of Jew survived in World War II? Right? Seriously. What kind of Jew survived in a concentration camp? A nice person? They went down 1, 2, 3. You know that. Agreed? Yeah. What kind of kid survived in World War II? You learn to steal, you learn to cheat, it's what it is. Are you putting a blame with it? It's necessary. Lots of kids after the war was over, would come place and steal from them until they normaled out. So this is, you just have to understand this. A second characteristic story is the story of Shir and Tarnabal, where the Maskilim, got their candidate in to be the chief rabbi of a famous community, Tarnopol, very well-known place in 15,000 Jews in eastern Galicia. He's the leader of the Maskilim, Joseph Pearl. He writes all these famous anti-Hasidic books, which are brilliant, but nobody read them because the Hasidim bought all the copies. That's what they used to do. That's very smart, right? Have all the copies. Like one survives, and he's always being malshin the Austrian government, writing him letters, he should suppress the Hasidim. And he wanted a guy like him that he admires to be the Rav, the Av Beis in Tarnopol. And he got the leading Moscow, Shlomo Yehuda Rappaport, who was a big historian, who was Talmud Chacham, he's son-in-law to Ksos, but he was a big Moscow. And he got him, the Austrians made it that he got elected. But then the Hasid and the others in town made his life so miserable. They put pitch and tar in his rabbinical chair and broke his windows and all this kind of stuff. So he got out of there, baby. And wait a minute. And what's the result? The word was out. You're not going to be a Rav of a Kahila in Galicia if you're like one of these modern type guys. You see? And he kept saying, I'm not modern, but it wasn't true. And This is a whole long discussion. I'm going to talk about this somewhere else soon. But let's put it this way. It's a marker. What is a rabbi? In Germany, they solved that problem by creating reform rabbis. And those who didn't like that solved the problem by creating conservative rabbis. Are you going to have a conservative rabbi in Galicia? Are you going to have a reform rabbi in Galicia? We have a maskilic rabbi in Galicia. The answer is no. Then, not if you live in a community in Eastern Galicia where most of the people are like, either Hasidic or Misnagdic or things of this nature. Even though he was a charismatic and dynamic type guy, and he ended up having to leave after a year or two. Went to Prague. When he went to Prague, that was a city that was so far gone that he was considered on the extreme right. You know what I mean? So he felt more comfortable. By the way, the guy that came after, just to give you an idea what I'm talking about, Rappaport was once a famous name once upon a time. Today you never heard of him. He wrote very famous biographies. He founded modern Jewish history, you might even say. The Maskilic tradition of modern Jewish history in the very early 1800s. He was fascinated by these kinds of historic topics. In all the books they talk about him all the time, bracket him with Sunz and Rappaport and Krochmal and all that. And he knew how to learn, but that's not where his passion was. His passion was Jewish history. So I'm talking about new models now. This didn't exist once upon a time. For 17 years afterwards, there was no rabbi because they were afraid of fights. After 17 years, they picked a guy who was a very quiet rabbi and didn't talk to anybody and just learned with 4 or 5 guys and, Paskin Shilas, old school, and really, did a Shabbos Agadol speech and had nothing to do with anybody. And he wrote one book, and then he died. But the one book was the Michas Chinuch, so it took off. So today, nobody's heard of Rappaport, everybody's heard of Michas Chinuch, but nobody knows who the rabbi was. They show Babad, It's funny how these things work. But what was it saying? It's saying if you're going to be a Rav in Galicia, you better be like that type. Beg pardon?
The previous slide. Who was the guy in the middle?
Go back one. They're both the same. This and him is Shlomo Yehuda Rappaport. Yeah, I mean, he looks ultra-Orthodox, right? There's a lot to talk about, but now's not the time for that. I'm just trying to give a general business. By the way, same thing happened with the next guy, Gemara Chayas, who was able to get into Orthodoxy. But in his time, he was also big into Jewish history. He was considered a Moscow, and when he went to different towns, they threw him out, same way. Fortunately, his family was millionaires, so they owned the city, so he could always be the rabbi of the city he owned, Tzalkiev. But when he tried to be in college and other places, that didn't work. Now, incidentally, both of these guys, Shir and the Marazchias, got letters backing them from the Chassam Sofer. So in the yeshivish type world, that would work. If you got a letter from Rabbi Yoshev, they'll say, okay. But it's the Hasidim. They don't care about that. You get it? I know what I see, and therefore I'm breaking the windows. See? And they wrote scurrilous plays about it. Anyway, whatever. The third example is when the Maskilim in Lemberg, which is a big community, actually pushed in a mamash, a reform rabbi from Germany named Cohn. So they poisoned him. It was a murder. Okay? Here's the book about it from a few years ago. Abraham Cohn. They threw, rat poison in the soup or something like that. It was terrible, The whole family, him and his family ate lunch and they all died. Something like that. And they can never pin the crime. What is this? This is Galicia. This is Poland. What is this? No. What does this bespeak? It ain't the old world anymore. It's the new crazy Michigas where extremes are coming in there, and you have these clashes, and the government's trying to shove this down the throat, and they're trying to. Nothing's normal. Nothing's natural. Okay? Yeah. Okay. And tell me what you really think. Yeah. Now, meanwhile, in eastern Galicia, where most of the Jews live, a great tension is being played out between 3 groups. Listen, I didn't invent this. This is Eastern Europe, so we're talking about Eastern Europe. This is the way it goes. It's complicated. You have the Poles, but they're the noblemen. You have the Ukrainians, who are the peasantry, still subject to slavery. And then you have the Austrians, who monopolize all the political power. They're the police, the administrators, the prison wardens, and all this kind of stuff. And then, of course, you got the Jews. Okay? And therefore, it's a crazy time to live there. The third era is that of the Emperor Franz Joseph. Let's go to the next one. Oh, yeah, by the way, it wasn't even hard. When the Poles tried to make an uprising against the Austrians in eastern Galicia, I spoke of it a month ago, all the Austrians had to do was say to the peasants, kill him. You don't like him anyway. And they do, look, they bring in, heads, and they get money for it. No. It's a very smart way. The Austrians didn't have to fight anybody. It's actually funny. The Poles say, we're going to have an uprising to save our national honor. Yeah, the 5 noblemen, but the million people under you don't see it that way. And so the Polish nobles had to say to the Austrians, we'll call off the uprising, call off the peasants. You see? It shows that a nutty system that goes over there. But the third era is the next emperor, Franz Joseph. This is when he was young, middle-aged, and old. He was almost 70 years. He was an emperor for 68 years. Long time. And let's put it this way. He's ruling Galicia. It's in 2 phases, A and then B. The first phase is the first 20 years, in which the old system still obtained. The Jews have no rights. They're subject to police state. They're trying to Germanize them. All the old business I was talking about. That's Franz Joseph A. But then, in the late 1860s, because Austria suffered a couple defeats in wars, he found it necessary and advisable to cut 2 deals, which actually worked very well. Ausgleich, they call it. A big one with the Hungarians and a small one with the Poles. And what he basically said was like this: don't make any rebellions, this, that, and the other, and I'll make it good for you. You will run your own country. I'll have the army. You'll agree on the foreign policy, the money, a few basic commonalities, and you'll have everything else. So you be the masters in your own house as long as you agree to be in my empire. And it was a good deal, and both took it, the Hungarians and the Poles. One of the reasons they took it was they're both minorities in their own country. So they're really cutting a deal to stick it to the nationalities that are under them. Does that make sense? It's a dirty deal. See, if Hungarian, in the old big kingdom Hungary that once exists, most of the population is Romanians, Slovaks, Croats, this, that, and the other. So the Hungarians said, but we want to be the master race in that kingdom. So Franz Joseph said, okay, I'll let you do that. In return, you be loyal to me. With the understanding, if you ever cheat me, I'll tell the others to go get you. Same thing in Poland. In Galicia, he told the Poles, the nobles, the big shots, he said, I'll let you be the masters over here, but of course, if you do any deals, I'll sick the others on you. He didn't have to say that, was obvious. Now, what does that mean? It means that now, from 1867 to 1914, these last 40 years, is a golden age for the Poles and the Jews. Because the Austrians kind of pulled out and let the locals run the show. In addition to which, Franz Joseph, by this time, had come to the conclusion, very interestingly, the Jews are not a problem. The Poles are a problem. The Ukrainians, the Hungarians, the Czechs, the Croats, the Slovenes, the Italians, the Romanians. Right? Not the Jews. It's not a problem. You know why? They don't want their own country. See what I'm saying? They just want Greta Garbo. They just leave me alone. That's all they want to do. And to be very fine. And so he said to the Poles, I'll give you autonomy over there, but you have to emancipate the Jews. And the Poles said, I don't know about that. We don't want to do that. It's not the old system. He said, if you don't do it, I will. And so they had a whole bunch of debates in the Galician parliament that he allowed, and they finally gave the Jews complete and total civil rights in 1868 in Poland. Which means from the political point of view, from 1868 to 1870s, 1880s, 1890s, when some of your great-grandparents were around, right? Great-great-grandparents, if they come from that part of the world, they say, oh, the old days before the First World War was Gewaltig, and Franz Joseph, and this, that, and the other, because from the political side of it, it's kind of true. The Poles had a good deal. Listen to what I'm saying. If you lived in the Prussian part, they tried to Germanize you. If you lived in the Russian part, they tried to Russify you. If you lived in Galicia, you could be as Polish as you want. You have Polish schools, Polish universities, Polish literature. Polish life was flourishing. You just had to be under Franz Joseph. It's better that than being under Russia. You see what I'm saying? So they actually cut a very interesting deal. So in the second half of his reign, it got politically good for the Poles. Now, not for the Ukrainians, okay? But for the Poles. So, and this is when Franz Joseph became very popular among the Jews after 1868. But what about the Ukrainians, the Ruthenians, as they call them over here, right? Here you have a permanent tension, and there's no good solution because of the hegemonic Poles. Notice that's not a problem you could solve. If you live in that part of the country, the two groups hate each other. You've been dominating us and enslaving us forever. Franz Josef made them emancipate these peasants. And so the result was that they're no longer legally, like used to be a slave. But still, the Poles are the judges, the Poles are the sheriffs. You see what I'm saying, right? The Poles are the cops, or the police chiefs. And so it's not really a fair environment. I don't know if you paid attention the first night when we had that 2 minutes of that Ukrainian movie, Polish movie, and these guys in the bar, what are they complaining? They're complaining in 1939, says, the Poles are still sticking it to us. They're taking the churches away and turning them Catholic, and they're doing all kind of bad things to the Ukraine. The Poles and Ukrainians hate each other historically. And the reason is because the Poles always beat up on the Ukrainians. That's just how it goes. Who cares? 1 million Jews, 500,000 Jews are living in the middle of that. I'll say it again, 500,000 Jews are living smack in the middle of all that. And so, who does the Jew favor? Which set of customers? If the two want to kill each other, where does the Jew stand in all this? It's not a very comfortable position to be in. So Jews are in the middle, which is the same thing in Hungary. In the King of Hungary, the Slovaks were persecuted. Well, what if you're a Jew, like my mother, living in Slovakia at that time before the First World War? What do? Do you side with the Hungarians? Do you side with the peasants? You know, which way does it go? This is the worst kind of the goals. When there are competing nationalities, comes the question, each one demands that you support them, and whichever way the Jew goes is going to be wrong to somebody. And in a ultimately bad situation, it's bad to both. And that's the fate of Jews. This is why Zionism started in Austria-Hungary. Who's the one who started Zionism? Herzl and people like that. Because it's totally aware of the fact that wherever the Jews are, they're in the wrong spot. The only way is to get out of here and have our own country. But we won't have to do this kind of junk. Because otherwise, we're just existentially permanent going to be in a bad spot. It'll never get better. We need to move out of here and go. He's sensitive to this in a way that others aren't. So in 1870, 1914, as I said before, Galicia, in the sense of civil rights, is great for the Jews and for the Poles. That's why, as in the Galicianer shuls in the late 1800s, when they made a mishbech for the emperor, they said for Franz Josef and Shraga Feivel, which means, it's Franz Josef, the son of Franz Karl. It's not really his name. It's an endearment. You understand? In Russia, this was not the case. They hated the Tsar, but he had to say it anyway. Because if you didn't say a prayer for the government, somebody would tell on you. Right? I think I told you the story, but hopefully you forgot. Then when the First World War broke out later in 1914, so a delegation of rabbis from Hungary went to Franz Josef and they said, we want you to know we were praying that you should win. And the emperor was 84 at the time, said, let's cut the baloney. You know at this moment, a bunch of rabbis in Russia were saying the same thing to the Tsar of Russia. And they said, but there's a difference, we beat it. So, but there's great poverty. As I said before, that they couldn't fix. Which leads, as I said before, to migrations to Hungary and then eventually to America. Lots of Galicianers, as you know, moved to America. A lot went to Romania. Isn't that interesting? A lot go to Romania. Was a very anti-Semitic country with a good economy. And so a lot of Galiciana Jews will move. That's why you find in Romania people named Friedman, you know, and Weiss and Schwartz. They're Galiciana Jews moving to try to a place where they think they can make a living. And there's great tension building up because the Ukrainians are slowly rising. They're acquiring their own national identity. And so you have two competing nationalities getting conscious of themselves, opposed to the Ukrainians. Not good. Nowhere are Jewish rights respected in and of themselves. It's only, can you support my group? So when the Jews got civil rights, they could elect their own people to parliament. There are areas where the majority of the population is Jewish. There are towns in Galicia where the majority is Jewish. So they could elect, in certain areas, Jewish members of parliament. The first one was elected, look at this, was the Chassam Sofer's son, Shimon Sofer, the Krakow. He was the rabbi of Krakow. I'll say it again, the Chassam Sofer's son, Shimon Sofer. And he was a member of the Austrian parliament from Galicia. But what did he do? Nothing. Because he's very conservative. And basically said like this: I don't want any trouble with the Poles. Whatever the Poles do, that's what I vote for. Never made a speech, never did anything, you know? Whatever the Poles do, that's what I vote for, because I don't want any anti-Semitism at home. So the Jewish interest being represented. Now, one argument is yes, and the other argument is no. One is don't rock the boat, and this way, if you ever need a favor, you can ask from them. This will be a permanent question down to the Holocaust. What's the proper way of the Jews doing politics in Poland? Should you be ultimately loyal to the Poles and then ask them for favors? Or should you assert your Jewish national rights and be proud of being a Jew and alienate the Poles? When he died, this guy became for many years, the member of parliament, Joseph Samuel Bloch, who is a well-known, I would say, modern Orthodox rabbi in Vienna. He was, an old yeshiva guy, but very modern. And he became famous for fighting against the blood libel. There was a famous priest who was a professor at the University of Prague, Rolling was his name, August Rolling, Catholic priest. And he said he's expert in Judaism, and the Talmud says you should kill the children to use the blood for Pesach. It says so explicitly in the Talmud. And everybody knows that I'm telling the truth, and the rabbi's afraid to admit it. And I don't know why all the other rabbis like fumfing and schmumping and all the rest of it. And this guy took the bull by the horns, and he published a thing in public. He said, I say you're a public liar, and I dare you to challenge me in court. In fact, I'm going to prove you can't even read a page of the Talmud itself without a translation. Your translation is no good. And I'm going to make Ashen Blotter from you in front of everybody, and I'm saying it out in public, and I dare you to sue me. So naturally, he had to sue him, when you do it like that. And he said, I can't wait for the court to come, because I'm going to bust you in pieces. And all the Catholics said, well, you'll show him, and all the rest of it. On the day of the trial, no show. No show. And so the guy was exiled by the Vatican to be a missionary in Tibet. It's the truth, and he became a hero, even though the others should have done it also. And therefore, so it's naturally Joseph Shmuel Bloch, right? And he had Österreichische Wochenschrift. He had the Jewish Times of Austria. That was his newspaper. And he's not a Zionist, but he's a proud Jew. And therefore, how's it work? When he runs for office, he gets elected in Galicia. The Poles don't like him. Why do the Poles don't like him? He says, I don't care about the Polish interests. I don't care about the Ukrainians. I'm a Jew. I represent the Jewish interest. Oh, no, we don't like that. If the Jew is there, as they've always been, as a help for us, that's one thing. If the Jews want their own independent identity, this is not your country. But he says, but we're the majority population. It's not your country. So you see these politic things represent a very complicated... I'm trying to describe a Poland in its different parts. They got a lot more complex as far as the Jews are concerned in the 19th century. So whereas everywhere else, things are moving to be better for the Jews, in Eastern Europe, it's not that way. It's much more complicated. Nowhere, as I said before, Jewish rights respected in Galicia, except by the emperor. And he insists that if there's a government contract, the Jews have to get a proportional share, like we say today, the affirmative action, you know what I mean? The minority contracts. And if there's a railroad, which was the big employer over here, if a railroad is a big employer, the emperor insisted the Jews get, if they're 10% of the workforce, they get 10% of the jobs and all that kind of business. And so if it was Austria, until 1914, until 1918, fair it was. But the emperor is the referee. You understand? He's the referee. So you have a tiny, you have to go to the Austrian government. It's complicated, what can I tell you? Okay, now to Russian Poland, the third part. Because there was the Prussian part, the Austrian part, now the Russian Poland, which everything else. As I told you before, there's two parts. There's Poland, Congress Poland, and then there's the old parts, which are no longer part of Poland. They're absorbed totally by Russia. Lithuania, Belarus, Ukraine over here, huge areas of the Kingdom of Poland yesteryear with gigantic Jewish populations. Right, with gigantic Jewish populations. Look at the next one. This line shows you, there's Congress Poland. This whole part that I'm pointing with my pointer here used to be part of Poland. Look how much was left over. This is Ukraine, this is Belarus, this is Lithuania. A lot of you come from there. You see? That was no longer part of Poland. That's directly under Russia. It's annexed by Russia. That was the deal. And so there, you're subject to Russification. If you're living, for example, in Vilna, which is outside of the Congress Poland, if you're living in Kiev, if you're living in Minsk, and Volozhin, and hundreds of other places, forget the Poles, baby. They're not in charge. It's the Tsar of Russia. Either you're going to be one of these real religious Jews that's going to try to reject and resist Russification, or you're going to go along. If you're going to go along, you're not going to become Polish. What's the point? You don't get anything. You become Russian. Now starts Russian Jewry. You get what I'm saying? There was no such thing ever. But now in the 1800s, you get Russian Jewry. What do I mean Russian Jewry? The Jews of the provinces of Poland that were annexed by Russia and directly subject to Russian administration, not the Congress Poland, there you get the full business that if you want to get any rights, all the rest of it, as a Jew, you'll never get full rights. But if you want to get 10%, 20% rights, better pick up some Russian, go to Russian school, and all the rest of it. Incidentally, this whole area that I'm pointing to over here with this line and Poland, that's called the Pale of Settlement. If you're Jewish, you're only allowed to live there. Because Russia itself kept up the old policy, which is we want no Jews. Okay? Before Catherine the Great took over Poland, there were 0 Jews in Russia. The famous law from long ago. They don't want it. They have the right. They don't want it. Jews killed Christ, that kind of thing. That's really how they saw it. I mean, really, very religious. But now they took over Poland, so you get all this territory, but you also get a booby prize. You only get all the Jews, And they didn't know what to do with all those Jews. It wasn't a small population. And by the way, it wasn't just Jews, it was Jewish Jews. The Jewish Jews in the world. Hasidism is rising. The Yeshivaism is rising. Even the Haskalah, which is not a Russian thing, is rising. So it's a very vigorous Jewish population. And they're in the millions, and they're growing. I showed you the numbers before in Galicia. You have similar numbers in Russia proper. The Jews are growing, growing, growing. Where is it going? What are we going to do with this group? They're a bone in the throat. They're unassimilable unless we learn how to assimilate them, obviously. And so, as I said before, in the rest of Poland, those new areas, it's Russification. In Congress, Poland is more complicated, right? Because there the Russians said the Poles can run the show. And so it all depends on who the czars are. Let's go this one. If you're under these two guys, 1825, 1855, 1855, 1881, the policy of the Russian government is to try to assimilate the Jews. Let's encourage them to speak Russian. Let's encourage them to go to Russian public schools. Let's encourage them to go to Russian universities. And hopefully they'll convert along the way, which often happened. Okay? And anyway, they won't be so Jewish. They'll be more like the Russians. And their children will convert like that, or their grandchildren. Which was true. Wasn't a bit untrue about all that. And let's try, this obviously put them in odds with the religious Jews, with the yeshivas, the chaters, the rebbes, and all that, the Hasidic, all the rest of it. But this is the Russian government. They're willing to do that. And the general policy was to absorb the Jewish population as much as possible. He was a real son of a gun. He's the one who took the children at the age of 10, kept them 25 years in the army. You've heard of that. He was a little bit better, Alexander II. I say a little bit better. Compared to the monster, a little bit better. Because he was a little bit better, it was a lot more assimilation in his time. Because people really thought, gee, we can really become Russian. And Alexander II looked like, I repeat, looked like he was eventually going to go liberal. Because he freed the slaves in Russia. They freed slaves in 1862. So he did other things like that. And so maybe one day the Jews will get full rights also. Maybe. He even said, if you're rich or highly educated, maybe I'll let you live in Russia as an exception. There were some Jews who moved into Russia, Moscow, Leningrad, St. Petersburg, places like that, if you're of the few. So it looked like, Russia takes a little bit longer than England, but sooner or later catch up to England. And I know that was baloney, but I'm talking about how the way it looked at that time. And so the pressures on the Jews in Russia, I keep coming back to the point, Russia means the old parts of Poland are not going to be reattached to Poland. So when I say Russia, I'm talking about Ukraine, Belarus, Lithuania, Latvia. That's what we're talking about all the time. You're subject to these tensions and these pressures. So for the Jews in the rest of Poland, if you want to assimilate, go Russian. But just like happened with Austria, the stupid czars ruined the economies of Lithuania, Belarus, and Ukraine, partially to stick it to the Jews. They're so crazy. There are new books out about this, by the way. A guy wrote a book not long ago about this called New History of the Shtetl. The Russian government introduced policies to crush the Jews in the countryside. You're killing the bees that produce the honey, but we're willing to do that. And so they introduced poverty and the abandoned shtetl, the poor shtetl. When you look at photographs from 100 years ago, 120 years ago, it looks poor. And it was. If you looked at it 200 years ago, it would look rich. So why would the government do that? In Russia, you don't ask any questions. You understand? They're all about having control, and they viewed the Jews as a menace. The Russians were afraid of the Jews. Isn't that interesting? They said the Jews are so smart, they'll take over everything if we let them. So they have it's hard for people to understand that. And I'll tell you why. In this country, we're used to regular racism. Racism goes like this. These people, who live in the inner city or here and there, they're dumb, they're primitive, all the racist stuff. They couldn't make it on their own. It's a crime. You understand? The family will fall apart. That's where we're used to the racism over here. Now, here's a funny racism in Russia. These Jews, they're disgusting, they're low. If you don't watch out, they'll get all the A+. If you don't watch out, they'll buy up all the land. If you don't watch out, they'll take over all the stores. If you don't watch out, they'll be all the doctors and lawyers. If you don't watch out, they'll be all the professors. It doesn't work. I'm trying to show you what a cognitive dissonance Russian racism was. That they, on the one hand, want to treat the Jews like they're inferior element, they're primitive element, all the rest of it. But then when you scratch and you say, why? Oh, they're so smart, they'll take over everything. It's that oxymoronic, racist attitude is very typically Russian. They did not know what to do with the Jews. You see? They did not know. They would be much more comfortable if the Jews indeed were dumb, illiterate, barefoot, and primitive, and there were a certain type of peasantry. That the Russians are experts in. They've run many subject peoples. Still do. What do we do with the Jews? You see? What's the story over there? I can't let them into Russia proper. They'll own everything. I can't let them go. So this is what happened. Under the first czars, they said, let's bring them to universities. The second czar said, oh my God, what do we do? And they said, no Jew can go to university. 3% of the student body. Because otherwise, it's going to be terrible. That's the nutty business that makes up Russia. We all understand this. Now, on the other hand, even with all the worst intentions in the world, let's go back one. Yeah. If you're here, a Jew, a poor Jew, with a little bit of a brain, in the 1800s, if you set up a business, a factory here, you have the whole Russian market all the way to the Pacific Ocean. Do you see what I'm saying? No, economically, if you're a shtickle capitalist, your economic possibilities are unlimited. And smart Jews, some Jews are good at business. That's what I've been told. He says, I've never met any, but I've been told. He says, some Jews will, in a ruthlessly capitalistic environment, do exactly that. Let's go forward. Here are two guys that own all the tea in China. Or be very specific, this is Vysotsky, this is Brodsky. Vysotsky owns all the tea. No. He was a firm guy who, by John D. Rockefeller type capitalism, which was legal in the 19th century, killed the opposition, and then all the tea in Russia was made by him. So how rich was he? Okay? This is Brodsky, did it with the sugar. He's a Litvak, he's a Ukrainian. Okay? Doesn't matter. Because once you get the right thing, how should I put it? You have all the Starbucks in Russia. From the Atlantic to the Pacific. All the way. You have all the Starbucks, all the coffee bean, all that kind of business. It's unbelievable. It goes there. There were other guys that did it with the railroads. Polakov did it with the railroads. And as such. Meaning, with the worst intentions in the world, you've also created an environment in which the Jews can do good. By the way, this guy's a famous story. He was a little bit religious, And so the Chofetz Chaim used to get money from him, naturally. And one time, he even started a kollel, called Brodsky's Kollel, and Voloshin Yeshiva. And the Chofetz Chaim, when he visited him to get money, so he showed him his last will and testament. He said, which was drawn up in traditional Jewish fashion. The firstborn gets a pishnai, gets a double portion, and this one gets this, and that one gets that, and the girls will get the money through the halachic way, and all the rest of it. And all of his books, he's giving as a present to the Voloshin Yeshiva, because everybody ever wrote a sefer, sent it to Brodsky, obviously. You hope to get $50, And his money is divided like this, and the Chofetz Chaim famously said, I guess, tear up the will and rewrite it. Give all the money to Yeshiva, give the books to your kids, because Yeshiva doesn't need the books, and your kids don't need the money, It's a famous business. But nevertheless, there rose in Tsarist Russia, in spite of all the terrible conditions, a whole class of Jews who were successful army contractors, helped with the railroads, built up these kind of businesses and all the rest of it. Lodz in Poland will arise as an important industrial center because these Jews, Hasidim by the way, will set up textile factories, and you make all the buttons for Gans Russia. You make all the pants for Gans Russia. There used to be a town called Baltimore, Maryland, where 100 years ago made all the straw hats for the whole America. Do you know that? In this town. Right? Made all the straw hats. So it was it was a Jewish business. There are other things as well. Anyway, so this is the crazy 19th century. Now, the Russian government, as I told you before, had shifting policies towards the Jews. First, they tried to educate them and to become Russian in almost every way, or really every way. Count Uvarov, as I said before, tried to get them all into colleges and universities and close down the yeshivas. But as I said before, they don't permit them outside. Let's go to the next one. Outside the Pale of Settlement, you have to live in here, so there's contradictory policies. You're Russian, but you can't live in Russia. But then, in late 1800s, they go the opposite route. Under Alexander III and Nicholas II, they say no Jew can live anywhere, and no Jew can be a doctor, and no Jew can go to college, and no Jew can enter the professions, and no Jew can be over here because they're going to take over. You see? And so what are the Jews supposed to do? They want the Jews to Russify, but they don't want them to play any role in Russian life. So that's smart. Think of what I just said. I'm going to get you a Russian education, but you won't have any job. You know what you just did? You created a communist. You can't blame them. Or a revolutionary, or something like that, right? The dumbest thing in the world. You give somebody an education, and you deny him any opportunity. That's dumb. Don't give him an education. I said 100 times, if the Tsars of Russia would have had any brains, which they didn't, they would have bankrolled all the Hasidic Rebbe's. Give all the money to Lubavitch. No, you get it? Let them all spend all the time singing Nigunim and all. Then they won't join the revolutionaries. But they couldn't see that way, right? In the end, who killed the Tsar and his family? A bunch of shooters with pistols, led by a Jewish guy, Goritsky, whatever, Uritsky his name, So it was not very smart, but that's what they did. They weren't interested. We're not interested in these guys. We're interested in the Jews in Poland, in Congress Poland, for tonight's lecture. And here the Tsars started by allowing a degree of autonomy. I told you before, genuinely Polish administration, Polish culture, and everything. Under the first Tsar, Alexander II, they kept their bargain more or less. But under the second Tsar, the Russians started to impinge on Polish autonomy, cheating, which led the Poles, emotional Poles, to have an uprising, a stupid but emotionally understandable rebellion in 1830. The crushing of the rebellion was followed by a diminished autonomy and in creeping Russification under the next two Tsars. After 1863, the same thing happened under Alexander II. There was another famous hopeless rebellion that was crushed in 1863, followed by even harsher punishments and greater Russification. After 1863, the Poles in Congress Poland realized their situation is hopeless as long as the current world order existed. So it ain't going to get better, and no more revolutions, because all that ever happens is we get crushed. The Russians don't get hurt, we get hurt. So as long as this map is there, look, this, Russia, Germany or Prussia, Austria. As long as these don't make war with each other, the division of Poland, there will be no Poland. Not really. And what we have to do is hope for tomorrow, the day after tomorrow. That's the only realistic thing to do. Get it? That's the only realistic thing to do. And so, wisely, therefore, after the 1863, the Poles concentrate, the Goyim I'm talking about, concentrate on what they call Gegenwartsarbeit, which means work in the present, build up Polishism. Half our people can't read, and the ones who can't never heard of Polish, and the peasantry and all the rest of it. Let's make Poland into something. You know what I mean? Concentrate on the peaceful side of building yourselves up. The Polish language and literacy becomes widespread. The peasantry is finally fully emancipated. A new workforce allows industrialization. Poland became one of the most industrialized places in the world. Isn't that funny? Polish culture is vigorously cultivated. Polish nationalism intensified. Whatever happens in Zionism is a reflection of what's happening in Poland. I just talked to you cultural Zionism. What did the Chamam say? We can't have no politics, so let's concentrate on building up the Jewish Bildung, Jewish culture. The Poles say the same thing. Let's have a university, let's have a literature, and all the rest of it. Now, here comes the problem as I come to the last part of tonight. Here comes the problem. Now, for the first time, the middle class becomes the dominant element for the first time in Polish history, the middle class. Because now they're starting to get normal and industrialized and educated and all the rest of it, and capitalist. Well. Polish nationalism is a middle-class nationalism. You follow? Middle-class. The middle-class mothers are the ones who teach their children all the patriotic songs and all the rest of it. The middle class is not like the Jews, they never have. I've been telling you that since the 1500s. But in the past, only the nobles counted. Not now. This does not bode well for the Jews in Poland. You see, the fundamental problem is the Jews are more than 10% of the population. And they're growing. And where is this going? It's like Donald Trump. He said, we're too many illegals, too much of people not like us. You're Polish. You look around, you see all these Hasidim. And 10 years now, you see more. And, they're buying up houses and they're taking, and they're not us. And how'd they get here? And they look so different. And they're clannish and they don't regard themselves as Polish. It's not like England with a few thousand Jews. It's not like France, 50s. That's doable. You're millions. And tomorrow will be more millions. Where's it going? Okay? The middle class leaders that arise now divide along two lines. Very important for our story. Number one, the nice leaders say the thing to do is Polonize the Jews. Try to assimilate them to us. Teach them Polish language, make them normal. The evil leaders say the Jews can't and won't. Just get over it. They need to be removed somehow or other. Now, we're not talking Hitler over here, but it is hostile because, look, they ask themselves, are these type of guys going to become Polish? The Ger Rebbe? Right? Are they going to become Polish? Are they like Polish food and the Catholic Church and the Polish songs and Polish holidays? Give me a break. Okay? Middle class agitators stoke ill feelings towards the Jews now. And starting on Christmas in 1881, a whole series of pogroms for the first time by Polish mobs. In Warsaw was a 3-day pogrom. I want you to understand what I just said. We just had in Baltimore some riots. Imagine 3 days with no cops. We had in Baltimore for 15 minutes without the cops that went crazy, right? And Madonna. How would you like 3 days, no police? And elsewhere in the Congress Poland. In other words, things start to really get bad for the Jews when in the last part of the 19th century, and this will hover over Jewish heads until the Holocaust. And even afterwards, even after the Holocaust, as I'll show you, it's amazing. It ain't the old kingdom of Poland anymore. So what do the Jews do? First of all, they immigrate. That's when you start moving to American place like that. This is when your ancestors, if they're from Poland, start moving out. Can't blame them. They're the lucky ones, the smart ones. And number two, Zionism. 1881, 1883 is the pogroms, and 1884 is the beginning of what they call the Chovevei Zion, which has its first convention in German Poland, in Katowice, right? Which is Germanized Poland, just over the border. You can already understand why people want to be Zionists. They said that, Poland is not for us. So we have to start thinking. Now, by the way, this is before Herzl, and they were not thinking daringly of a Jewish state, all the rest of it. But they started to think of, there's got to be some future out of here. And not everybody thinks of America. Some people say, what about Eretz Yisrael? Right? These Chovevei Zion started small, buy a little land, here and there. But the pogroms are the things that shake it up. This, by the way, is the famous Rabbi Shmuel Muliver, Rabbi Bialystok. Bialystok had a big pogrom. Okay? He was a great rabbi, and he was a big macher in the Chovevei Zion. don't have the exact number, but like something like 275, 300. Anyhow, and the third route is to assimilate, Polonize. That's another route. We haven't looked at that. Let's do so very quickly. Already back in the early 1800s, there were some Jews in Warsaw and Polish cities who tried to assimilate to Polish culture, like in 1800. They wanted a Polish version of Reform Judaism, just like the German Jews wanted a German patriotic version of German Reform Judaism. So here are people in 1820 and 30, it sounds bizarre to us today. Instead of saying, as the Germans did, Berlin is our Jerusalem, these people said, I mean it, Warsaw is our Jerusalem. Sounds a little bizarre after the Holocaust. They set up a Reform synagogue. They even set up a Reform seminary, rabbinical seminary, in 1826. But the seminary was run by a Catholic priest who who wrote books against the Talmud. It's so bizarre. I believe two-thirds of the graduates convert to Christianity. It's called the Rabbinical Seminary. Recently a dissertation was written about it. And so Reform Judaism doesn't have a great turnout in Poland. Unfortunately for these guys, the masses go Hasidic. But now you understand why Poland, 19th century, so many go Hasidic. Because it's a natural reaction against these trends that I'm describing. When the Reform Jews try to get the government to suppress the Hasidim out-politic them. They got this rich lady, Tamaro, and she was a multi-zillionaire. She's like Gracia Mendes. And she got the Polish government to leave the Hasidim alone. This is, let's go to the next one. This is right off the Evo. Tama Berkson, a patron of Polish Hasidism, benefactor of Warsaw Jewry. Little is known about her background in early years. Her father is described as learned and wealthy, briefly married to this guy, that guy, and she married the son of a Warsaw plutocrat, a frum but loaded. They had 5 kids, and her husband's second death. She took over the business, salt company and a bank. She had permission to own property outside the ghetto. It was the third Polish Jew to see civil rights. She's Gracia Mendes of the 19th century. Now wait a minute. Her contemporaries, including those who didn't hold her position, agreed she deserved the credit for the success of Polish Hasidism, right? As the premier patron of the movement in Poland, the premier patron of the movement in Poland. People don't notice, as the Hasidism is spreading in Poland, they have a very rich lady who gives them a lot of money. Okay? If you need a mikveh, you need a shtibel, you need a this, that, and the other. She was highly respected in the patriarchal religious community, 1807, that's early on. She not only supported the founding of the first Hasidic synagogue and base managed in Warsaw area in Praga, she gave considerable financial assistance to Hasidic leaders and employed some of them in an enterprise to give them a job. The famous Simcha Bunim Pshiska, one of the famous rebbes in the 19th century, mentioned in Poland, attended the fairs as her agent, supervised the lumber trade through Danzig, and managed her holdings in the town of Rudo. So she had him on the payroll. Okay? These are the side of Hasidim people don't know. He was succeeded in the later years by Yitzhak Gavorka, a very famous Hasidic Rebbe also, who later became the permanent Extradited with larger community. Upon the death of the Chozim Lublin, she bribed the officials to have his tombstone placed next to Shalom Shachta and others. She even did shtick in the cemetery. Although her precise role in the anti-Hasidic investigation is unclear, the Hasidic tradition maintains that she was successful in exonerating leaders and securing the legality of the movement. The Reformed Jews in Poland made a full court press that the Hasidic movement investigated by the government commission and show it's a negative phenomenon and evil and horrible and therefore should be outlawed. I'll give you an example. Didn't they say this guy in South America, I forget his name, the police arrested him, had a cult? Yeah, the rabbi something or other, right? You know, when they're kidnapping people, whatever. This is how they portrayed the whole Hasidism. And it's not like they had, the Jewish Clarence Darrow or something like that. She used her influence. They call that money. And they bestowed upon her honor, they called it Reb Termerl, and they try to suppress the book. Look at this. He wrote a book, as I told you before, called Reveal Your Secret. She bought all the copies so she could burn them. She won claim for general charitable work. You get the idea. This is actually a whole lecture that needs to, when somebody has a yard site, we'll talk about tomorrow. It just means that the Reformed Jews are not going to be able to suppress the Hasidic movement in Congress, Poland. The Reformed Jews are exquisitely frustrated. There's a whole book, let's go to the next one, which is all about the exquisite frustration of the assimilated and assimilating Jews, because this Professor Wyszynski, I know him, just read the Jewish Times of Warsaw, you know what I mean, knows all the Reform magazines. And they keep saying like this Hasidim is run out, it's now, it's about to be exposed for its inherent bankruptcy, you know, people are going to see through the phoniness of it, and the young people are always asking questions. They write this in the 1820s, the 30s, the 40s, 50s, 60s, until in the 1890s they go out of business. You see? And the Hasidim chug along. So this goes to show you what happened over there. Now, from a Frum perspective, the heck with the Reform and the Poles, but from a Polish nationalist perspective, it means the Jews are going to be regarded as a millstone in the neck of Poland. Because who are these people increasing all the time? Hasidic, for the most part. For Poles, the Jews are a problem. They're not Polish. For the most part, the Jews don't want to be. So get the hell out of Poland. In the 19th century, go. In the 19th century, the Poles are not masters of their own fate, so they can't do it. Russia rules them. From the point of view of the czars, the Jews in Congress Poland are a good thing because of the old rule, divide and conquer. So when he hears the Poles don't like the Jews, they're good, keep the Poles and the Jews in Poland, the more the merrier, mess over the Poles. I get that. But what will happen if the Poles ever do get their own state? You see where I'm going? Where will the Jews be then, especially the Hasidim? After all, a Pole has a right to ask, is this person and this person Polish? Are they Poles? It's a fair question. The stage is set for the storms in the 20th century, storms which have not totally subsided today, but the hour's late, so we're calling it over. Good night.